Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, coming off a cosmic evening at the Brava Theater in the Mission District of San Francisco, and I get a chance today to speak to the next of kin to one of the originators. Well, he was definitely a major player in the San Francisco sound, and a guy who taught my guest and his son, Tony, to appreciate all musics, no matter what they were. Merl Saunders Jr., an honor. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Yeah, all good.
You know, I want you to talk about the Miles Davis coming to your house. Do you remember a specific time that Miles would be there? And I mean, you told me a great story about Jimmy Smith teaching your dad, but when did Miles first get on the radar there?
First, I remember Miles was probably the early 60s. 63, 64. And there was just a slew of people that would always come to the house as long as they were in town. We had a music room in the back of our house, and people would just come, but it was more like just to hang away from the music scene. And anybody who was in town, because they would do the jam sessions that were, I don't know, they started at some ungodly hour in the morning and then ended at 9 or 10 o'clock. And those were, anybody was in town, they would come, they would show up at the gigs and play those, and then they would wind up at our house after.
Like maybe like 8 in the morning or?
The 10 or 11 in the morning, people would probably sleep or something, or they would just come right over, and then they would either play or just hang. And it's like tons of folks, you know, from Herbie, Coca Escovedo, I mean, the list goes on of all the folks who would do it. And the thing is, everybody in that world really all knew each other, or they were aware regardless of, there was the New York gang, you know, the Chicago jazz scene, Seattle jazz scene, the LA players, but somehow they all knew each other. And I think one of the common bonds was a lot of them met when they were in the service.
That's in Germany. I mean, but like that, what I'm trying to say is, how did your dad connect with how did he gain the street cred that they knew that he was the cat to go to?
Well, from the time of what I recall, from the time my father was a teenager, he had the top band in high school.
With Johnny Mathis.
With John, and Johnny was just a singer, and they were called the Educated Men. And mind you, and I think when I look at the pictures, there was actually no drummer in the band.
Right. It was vibes and upright bass, yeah.
Upright bass, piano, and I think my father, I mean, then he played acoustic piano and a massive horn section, probably 7 or 8 piece horn section. And my father would write charts and do all that, and they would play all the gigs. So they were known as having one of the better bands in high school, and they would play, you know, the balls, the proms, and at the rec center. You know, there was one. The
Booker T. Washington Rec Center, yeah.
The Booker T. Washington.
Not the hotel where Wes Montgomery had a room there, but that's the hotel.
No, it was the rec center over there in the Fillmore district, and they would play there, and the kids would come there and dance and do their thing, and so he was known for that. Went to the service, came back, and he was just one of the better, you know, right place, right time, playing the right gigs, doing the right stuff, getting the right attention, and I think that was about, and I don't know how the Weiss brothers found him to be signed on Fantasy that early.
That was my question. Is that how you don't know how they?
I don't know how they found him.
But your dad, the point is that his chops were he could arrange, he could write, and he could do all that stuff, which was pretty sophisticated for that time. But I'd love you to talk a little about, you know, basically what you feel his legacy is. You know, so many people, he was connected to so many scenes, and he taught you guys, you and Tony early on, not appreciate, but listen to all musics. He played on the Statler Brothers records. All right, there's stuff that you were like, I don't know what he's doing, but the point is that his personality came out in it, and he was close with Will Chamberlain. The guy was everywhere.
I think and that's because it was playing, and they were like the hot guy. I mean, they were like the hot players. So musicians, actors, all gravitated toward the guys who were like heavy in the scene, and it was right place, right time. I mean, down on Broadway there was the committee was it was called called the Committee with like Howard Hesseman.
It was a Wavy Gravy and those guys?
No, it was a theater company.
Wow.
It was Howard Hesseman, maybe Max Gail was in it, run by this guy Lee Sienkiewicz, who was a producer of.
And so they would integrate multi-entertainment kind
It
of.
was like, you know, it was kind of like the scene now. Like the hip guys always find the hip guys. It's just what it was. And the actors were all into music, and the musicians could relate to the actors just because they're all creative arts people. And you're talking about the early '60s. It was the burgeoning scene of the sort of free love and all that stuff was happening on the other side of town, but down on the opposite side of town were lots of theater, lots of music. I mean, and then the rock stuff happened sort of in the Haight-Ashbury. But previous to that, all the other clubs were doing stuff. There were tons of clubs in San Francisco, and people played them, and there was actually an audience where people, you know, it was a different time because music was very important to people, and people came out and supported like who they liked. So. And there were a lot of people, you know, and then Marin had its own little thing, but definitely they were there, and all the players all knew each other. And what I remember, when I'm thinking about it is, so my father and Vince Guaraldi, they were both on the same label.
Galaxy.
They were on Galaxy.
And Jader was as well.
And Cal Jader, Bolisetti, they were.
This is my pocket of time.
I mean,
Yeah.
Kenny Burrell, and you know, and those were the people that I remember being here a bunch. And they were, you know, they all knew each other, and that was the thing. And the bond was, if you're, you know, their level of musicianship, you know, they all sort of gravitated toward each other because they could all play at that level.
Talking to Merl Saunders Jr. here on the Jake Feinberg Show. I mean, when did you first pick up the apparatus, the guitar, and what kind of music were you? I guess how did he work with you guys? Did he kind of let you figure it out on your own, or did you have jam sessions on your own?
Well, for us, it's like whatever music.
Because let me just say, Mickey Roker's grandma used to say, "Rest in peace." You know, they'd say, "Why you?" He'd be in the back on Sundays shedding, you know, playing jazz, and his grandmother, they'd be giving his grandma grief, like, "Why are you letting him play that devil's music?" And she goes, "At least I know where my son is. At least I know where he is."
Yeah.
So I mean, how did your father?
Usually whatever music he would practice it, and we would always be around, and we'd hear it. So whatever he was playing, we knew the music inside out. We knew the commercial stuff he was doing, we knew that stuff, and then when he could get to it, he would include us in it. I remember we did a commercial for the Giants, and they had won the pennant, so it was 1963, which makes me 5 at the time. We're doing a commercial for KSFO radio where he's playing and we're singing.
No.
I mean,
For the Niners or the Giants?
No, for the San Francisco Giants.
Unbelievable.
They had won the pennant, and then he did the sort of lead-in music for the following season. But it was like he did that, so the kids were always involved. What we heard, you know, it was like anything was popular, you know, like anybody else. If it was on Ed Sullivan, that was it. Not a lot of places see media. You either heard it on the radio, or you heard it or you watched TV and saw it. And then the live shows, the shows we were able to go to, we were a kid. We weren't. I mean, I didn't understand jazz until I was in my teens, but it wasn't for the lack of not hearing it all the time.
I dig.
It was just, you know, I mean, at the time it was like the Supremes. It was James Brown was huge. You know, that was the mainstream, and that's kind of like what we listened to. But because of my father's thing, I also knew who Blood, Sweat, and Tears were. I also knew who Wayne Cochran and the CC Riders were. So basically, anything good was what we knew. We knew all the rock. There was a band called Motherlode with Smitty Smith.
Rest in peace, dude.
Out of Canada. We knew all that. I mean, we knew all the obscure songs. Any song that my father would learn, we knew. I mean, I knew who Jimmy Webb was as a kid. I mean, he did Up and Away. So it was like, so we knew who Jimmy Webb was. We knew the Fifth Dimension. So we were, you know, all my father's friends, whatever band they were with, that exposed us to that kind of music. And it was a lot of different people.
And he was playing with Caesar Escarunas, or he'd go on these these trips around the Sausalito. I mean, he was everywhere. Caesar, because that was because of Coke, right? I mean,
and Coke, it's funny because the first I remember Coke in the early '60s. That's when he met Coke, and Coke was the man for Latin music.
The man.
He was the man.
And Pete's birthday was yesterday, by the way. Happy birthday, Pete Escovedo.
Pops, 84.
Love him, dude. But he wasn't actually playing. He was singing at that time. Francisco Aguabella maybe give him some bongos and stuff, but he wasn't really playing.
Yeah, no, it was Coke, but because Cal Jader and that whole scene was Coke was involved in. So and Coke was like one of the players, and I think Pete was 5 or 6 years younger than Coke. That was the other thing. So Coke was the older brother. So that put him in those early days of jazz where Pete wouldn't have been. I don't know. I was too young.
I also want to be clear. I mean, your dad, Jim Stern, the engineer, was working on a Jerry Hahn Brotherhood session, and George Marsh, dear friend of the program, was on drums. Mel Graves was on bass, and they were playing really free, like way out. And it was a fantasy record. You might have even been there for.
I know.
But this is a great story. So Stern was like, "You're not going to sell albums playing this free." Merl, your dad was there grabbing a cup of coffee in fantasy, and he's like, "Hey, Merl, come in," because your dad wasn't a free player, but he could play inside jazz, heavy. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get my head around, is the idea that he could play Groove Holmes. He could play that heavy bebop, right? I mean, but he wasn't necessarily somebody who was going to. He couldn't play. He really couldn't play out.
No, and that was upon meeting Garcia, because Garcia was the one that got him to play synthesizers.
Now, how did that happen?
I think my father used to play. He would play a Wurlitzer piano and organ. That was the only thing he played at first, and then he switched to the Rhodes, and then Garcia was like, you got to try this. I think it was one of those Frank Zappa, George Duke things, like, let's put this in.
You nailed it, dude. You nailed it.
That was kind of my father's introduction to synthesizers. Is Garcia's like, let's. I don't know how, but I know that's when they first appeared.
But when the early synths looked like those old television operating things where you.
It wasn't. It was a program when he'd use an ARP Pro soloist and like the ARP string ensemble, because I think on one of his records he used a Mellotron on one of the records through Tom Fogarty, and then Yamaha gave him one of the first. It's a YC30. It was one of the first synthesizers. Like he and Stevie Wonder, they gave Stevie Wonder one, and there was another one floating. And my father put it on that Heavy Turbulence album. That was probably like one of the first times that he used a synthesizer on a record.
The story I want you to well, just off the bat, in your mind, out of all the bands in the Bay Area from that San Francisco sound. What was the most accomplished musical band? I mean, so many of those cats. Yorma came out of the folk scene. Garcia came out of the folk scene. Country Joe and the Fish did. And in your mind, what was the most accomplished musical band that came out of the? Because like Moby Grape, someone was yelling from the rafters last night at the Brava. Moby Grape, Jerry Miller and Cipollina were the first rock guitar players, but.
Well, the one I remember was like on the Butterfield tour, when I was on the Butterfield tour, which is probably 71, 72. I mean, it was the...
What was the Butterfield? I got to hear about this.
So, I think John Kahn was involved with the whole Woodstock scene and took my father to back... He was like... And I assumed that's how my father met Butterfield. Or maybe it was... Yeah, no, that was it. Because, or through the...
Well, Kahn originally was playing with Bloomfield.
Right.
Okay, that was before Jerry even knew him.
Right, and my father did the Steelyard Blues sound.
That was 72, right,
so
with Maria Moldauer, yeah.
And Nick Ravenitis
Absolutely.
was the producer and all those. And then, so he did that. And I think out of that, Butterfield was kicking around and needed a band. And so he and my father John and my father went back to Woodstock and rehearsed with them, and it was Chris Parker, Amos Garrett,
Jeff Moldauer,
and they did the Paul Butterfield Blues Band tour, and the opening act to that tour was the Sons of Chaplin Blues Band. So it was Bill Chaplin, and it was the original Sons. I don't know. Jim Preston was the drummer then, but I know that.
He might have passed away at that point, but Haggerty was in the Sons were the best, right? The Sons were the most.
And they had a horn section with, I think, Jim Rothmel and maybe Peter Welker was in the band. But they were like one of the first bands. I remind you, and as a kid, I really wasn't into the music. That's the other thing. So it was like, they were cool. It was a cool hang, and the music was bearable, to put it mildly.
So, but I'm having a flash from our radio interview. Did you used to like sit in the car with Will when your dad be like, you just hang out?
I remember Will taking me to my guitar lessons. He'd be around, and so
Will Chamberlain was taking you to your guitar lessons.
Yeah,
This is unfathomable.
And he would be at the house. This is 62, 63 when he played for the Warriors in the first year he played.
A lot of people don't know he played there.
Yeah, he played one season with the Warriors, and we kept his car at our house because he was always traveling, and I don't know how they met.
His car was parked on your house.
Yeah, we used to have his Bentley when he was on the road. Was in our garage all the time. And my father, he would say, "Yeah, drive it if you want." So we would drive it every once in a while. My father would drive it. But what would take me? I remember he would take me from our house over across town to my guitar lesson. And it was just, I was a kid. I mean, I kind of, what was just another character out of my father's world, and it was odd just because the guy was so tall, and but it was a ride to a guitar lesson. But like you said, the Cross Entertainment thing was going on so strong that they put together their own. They had their own label with the cat. I guess Wilt was real interested in music, so they put together. Wilt funded a label for my father.
What was the name of it?
It was called Wilt the Stilt Records.
Legends. I mean, where are you have a copy? You have a 45 of that?
I do have a copy of it.
Holy cow, man!
And there was a guy, Troy Dobbs, who was like a regional guy that they actually, we have his stuff licensed in the UK now. That was, they had a few labels. My father and another guy, Rick Appling, who was an arranger, and the two of them did the records, and Wilt was just like, yeah, like it, let's do it. And they put out 45s, and back then you could take them to the radio stations and all that stuff, and do all the other stuff.
When I talked to Chuck Rainey, he said he mentioned that the first time was your dad got an opportunity to work on Buck White, the Broadway show.
Is there able to stop this for this one?
If you need to kill time,
I need to stop it for this.
do it. Yeah, go. We're here with Merl Saunders Jr. at the Fenix Theater, having a ball after last night's incredible experience with Michael Shreve and Greg Arico, and it's just absolutely cosmic to be here talking about Merl Saunders because the guy was absolutely instrumental in so many people being able to grow as musicians and as human beings in the most beautiful bastion known as San Francisco, California, and keep chiming in, keep the comments coming in here. But really, it's been a wonderful extravaganza and just a wonderful weekend that will continue here on a balmy day here in San Rafael, California. Merl Saunders, just for the record, he was in the army in Germany and worked for the post office, but ultimately, oh, you're back. Thank you. I couldn't kill that much more time. No, there was Old Fantasy Studios was in San Francisco.
Down on Treat Street.
But your dad got his start at Wally Hyder's. I mean, that's where he was cooking a lot.
But that was he was at Fantasy was in the early '60s, so that was before Hyder's. Because I remember he was putting out records on Fantasy 64, 65 maybe. That's when the first stuff came out. I think there were a couple 45s, and then there was the big band record, which is probably 65.
What? Oh, I'm sorry. What big band record was it?
It was called the Merl Saunders Big Band.
The Merls. Do we have any idea who was that? All Chitlin Circuit Cats, or who was in
it? It was an organ trio with a big band.
Oh my! You have a copy of this too?
I have it. Yeah.
Holy cow!
And the interesting thing. So Soul Groovin' and Soul Roach are actually on that stuff. That's where those songs. That's where Soul Roach came from.
So interesting because those songs got popularized with Reconstruction or with the Garcia Fogarty band. I mean, Tom Fogarty. Again, you were a kid, so I'm not trying to. I know, and you weren't even really that into the music per se. But Fogerty was the original member of the Garcia Saunders band.
It was the three of them started together because Tom had left Creedence and sort of had nothing to do, and my father was. I mean, he was friends with both Fogerty brothers, but I don't know. And how he hooked up with Tom, became a better friend with Tom than John. Maybe because Tom was willing to play and John was doing. And at the time, Creedence, mind you, Creedence was larger than the Rolling Stones at that point. They were one of the largest bands in the world at that point. So they called the shots. But when he left the band, it was my father Garth. They started just kicking around, and then they started playing around.
And when Wales left the gig at the Matrix, then your dad came in there.
Right.
Ray Shanklin was the director of the big band, according to Tony. Tony's on fire right now. He's loving this. So at what point did you get? I mean, you had Cataclysm at the Catholic school across the street from the Dead House.
Yeah, used to go to summer school at St. Agnes right across, and had no idea. I mean, I was in another world. I was a kid.
Right. So when did the light go on that this was something that would? I mean, it really will never be repeated. I mean, it was a magical time in music. Not that you missed it, but when did you get really? When did you plug in? You know, when did you become kind of aware of the scene?
Well, I became my father's roadie in about 8th grade.
Oh, okay. Let's hear about that.
So I would just go down. I knew his gear. I could plug in his gear. I could get it working. And when he first started to play with Garcia, that was my job. Is hop in the van. He would take the gear down. I would set it up.
Oh, this is unreal.
And that's kind of how I got it started. The same thing on the road with Butterfield. We'd wheel his organ out and set up the Leslie, put the pedals on. And surprisingly, that a 12-year-old kid could do something that an adult theoretically should have been doing, but we were doing it. And that's how I started hanging out. And I was in 8th grade, so I remember one of my first gigs, my first paid gig. I remember the first time in Parrish, and it was Joe Winslow. They were the original roadie guys.
Winslow.
And
Winslow. I never heard of that guy.
Joe was the guy who started Hartschwecker speakers.
Oh.
But he was an original Grateful Dead crew guy, and so it was Winslow and Parrish were the original road guys for the Garcia Saunders band. And eventually Winslow, I think, retired from the road crew and started Hartschwecker speaker, and then Kid Candelario did it from that point on.
Would you? I mean, once you plugged in, I mean,
I would either go sit in the dressing room and do my homework, or go back home.
I mean, because I remember Larry Vann used to talk about, his partner. No, I can't remember the guy's name. Bass player, such a badass younger cat. It'll come to me later, but he used to sit in the Keystone Corner and watch your dad play. With Garcia and Khan, tunes just like Double Time, Boogie on Reggae Woman. Osborne was his name. Michael something, unbelievable bass player, but his mind was blown. Do you remember one of the first times you really got off on the music itself, as opposed to just hanging out, or was it?
It was just, I hate to say it was background noise.
Well, I mean, I want the truth. I mean, that's what
it was. It was kind of like first of all, the rock tunes I really didn't know, but I knew all the jazz tunes. So when they would do All Blues, Freedom Jazz Dance, like that stuff I knew because I had heard that.
Merle's tune is so sick.
I had heard that stuff my whole life, and so that stuff I knew. The rock tunes eventually I figured out. The night they drove a Dixie down was actually from the band. And things like that. The other one, it's no use. I knew. It's like. All that stuff, I figured it out, but it wasn't. And then I knew all my father's original songs, so we were into it to the fact that we really knew the music inside and out as kids in our house, just because we heard it all the time.
He continued San Francisco After Dark. Do I Move You? He was able. I mean, obviously he had great background with arranging and orchestration and writing tunes. How did he create really danceable hooks and hits in your mind? Because he wasn't, like I said, he wasn't like the most like audacious player. He didn't have like super chops or facility. The guy wrote so many hits.
Well, he wrote what he felt, and that was it. And the other thing is because Well, here's one of the things when you're talking. Although I wasn't into music, I realized as an early teen, like they were some of the best players in the Bay Area. That was one thing I realized, and I got that from hanging out in school with my friends who were musicians, and I realized, so my father, they're a lot better than most of my friends. And then I think at that point it clicked, like, okay, they're really good at what they do. But it was still like we knew the music, whether we were into it or not. It was the music was ingrained to us, just because we knew every song from the inception. We knew him from sitting at the piano and hearing it, as he's working out songs over and over. So we knew all of his music inside and out, and that's sort of how it started. And then there was a point when all the better musicians wanted to play with him. That's the other thing.
Pee Wee Ellis would play with him?
I mean, the list goes on. There was another guy, Freddie Smith, that played with Smokey Robinson, who was another childhood friend. And after all, you see everybody, Chuck Bernard Purdy, all those kind of guys, Arthur Adams, the guitar player.
My favorite guitar player.
So all these guys would come around, and then all of a sudden it started to click on, okay, Mark Isham did. I think Mark Isham was on the SF. No, he was on the direct-to-disc record.
I love that record.
And there was
Did E.W. Wainwright play drums on that record? I'm trying to think.
E.W. Wainwright.
What a maniac that guy! That guy was like an Elvin Jones cat.
On the Fantasy, he played.
Well, he played on the Sand Dunes with Tony a lot too.
Yeah, but he played on. I think he played on. There was the record with my father sitting on the Rolls Royce on the cover. E.W. and E.W.
Venus Brown, that was the greatest tune ever. Yeah.
And E.W. got the gig because he dated my cousin. My father's cousin.
He was a good player. He could play.
He was a good, but but he dated my cousin, who was Eddie Moore's sister.
Oh man, I just, it's funny. I asked Isla to come to the gig last night. His daughter. It all comes full circle.
So that's I'm pretty sure that's how E.W. got the gig and got on the radar.
This may be a stretch, but when Jerry would do his solo albums in the early 70s and go to L.A., a lot of Arthur Adams wound up on those sessions. I have to believe your dad was hipping Jerry to some of the studio cats down there.
Yeah, well, hipping John, because I think John Conn was like...
Conn.
Yeah, no, he was a mainstay, which is why he's on those records, too. So he's on the L.A. records that they did down there.
Michael O'Mardian was on those records, and then this guy Billy Fender kept showing up on the record.
Billy Fender, who was a great guitar player, and he was the guitar player on that Merl Saunders record. He plays
the wah pedal
on I think Easy Evil or something like that, where he plays the solo out in the song. That's just like, and Billy Fender was one of those session guys. That's the major session guys, and that was And I think when David Axelrod produced that record. And Axelrod bought up his whole crew. I remember there's a guy, King Harrison, played.
Another dear friend of mine. No, there was all this.
They were all bought in through David Axelrod because Fantasy wanted a more traditional kind of record out of my father, and they hired Axelrod as the producer, and that's what came out of it.
Were you too young to go? I mean, I don't think your dad would have brought you down to the jam sessions at the Fillmore in the Fillmore district, but.
No, we did, but none of the jam sessions. I mean, I remember going when he first got the gig for Big Time Buck White, which the play ran.
Big Time Buck White.
The play ran in San Francisco, and when the Sunday afternoon shows, we would be at those shows all the time, and it was like subject matter is what it is. We were hip kids. We were exposed to everything.
Everything.
So it really, and that was sort of Black Power. It's Oscar Brown Jr. play, and like kids, it just says how we absorb his music. We knew the play inside and out. We knew everybody's lines because we had seen it so much. Was the guy Charles Weldon? Ted Ross was in the San Francisco version that went on to do. I think he won his Tony for The Wiz as the Lion King, and most people would know him as the chauffeur in Arthur. Unfortunately, but the guy was like a great stage actor. Ted Lange became Isaac on the Love Boat, but he was in the play in the '60s. I mean, those were all the guys. Charles Weldon, I think sisters Maxine Weldon, great singer. There was all this, and that's what probably played in San Francisco before it moved to New York. And he got the gig from a guy named Phil. God, there was another organ player out of LA who originally had the gig, and he couldn't do it, either didn't want or couldn't do it anymore, and my father took over. Phil Moore was his name.
Yeah, I know. He was a great piano player. this is the other question. Melvin Seals comes on my radar because, John Kahn and Maria Moldau were going to the church to see him play, but Melvin and your dad were super tight and had a studio instrument. They had a rental company together. But
and Melvin I knew from, it's probably, the first time I remember being around Melvin was probably 74.
right, no, he was before Elvin Bishop. How did you know him?
So because Elvin Melvin would do gospel gigs, and Larry Van was playing drums, and there was this gospel woman named Merl Sandals.
Oh my God!
And
Van was on drums.
Larry Van was on drums. My brother played bass, and Melvin played I think he played piano doing that. But we would go around and do church gigs, and I was their roadie for that.
Oh, this is unreal.
And that was when I first met Melvin, and I was in high school. And he would do that, and that was my first introduction, and I think it was before. I think Melvin was in that whole Gideon sort of Sylvester scene.
He nailed it, dude. He was on that random Gideon thing.
Yeah, and random Gideon and Sylvester. Sylvester was like mighty, and Sylvester was a badass dude. That
he was the gay guy, the singer. Because Rico and Shone played on, but
yeah, and the Weather Girls. I mean, they were all out of that. Leon Patello. And that's sort of like, and that was out of the Sly Stone world. So that's where that connection is.
Would you say that setting aside your dad's the jazz acumen, which you got into, was Sly more your bag as a kid? Like what were you getting off on? Because I mean, as Justin Kreutzmann told me with Billy, he's like, does anybody think that whatever their dad's doing is really that cool?
Once Sly made, I mean, because we were on Sly when we were kids too, and once again, it was. I mean, most people say they were my father's friends; they weren't our friends.
Exactly.
And they were just weird fucking people. Prince Guaraldi was a weird dude for us when we were kids. I mean, it was just like they was a strange guy, and Sly was outside. And I remember going to his mom's house out in the Ocean District and all that, and being around him. But it was like it kind of connected when it was on when we would see him on TV. But still, that we were still in. At that point, we were really heavy into like either Motown, the Philadelphia sound. It was like black R&B music is what we listened to, and then because of our upbringing, we also knew all the standards.
Gamble and Huff kind of stuff.
The Philadelphia, but we knew jazz standards before anything else.
That's right.
We knew everything. I knew who Ella Fitzgerald was before the Beatles. I mean, that kind of the Ella Sarah-Vaughan, all those people, Nancy Wilson. Those were the people that my mom played in our house. So that's the music I really knew. It's like that stuff. We could sing it. I knew who Jack Jones. I knew Mel Torme. I knew all those guys. I knew who all those guys were before I knew rock guys.
That is fascinating stuff. I mean,
which is the foundation for a lot of the music. So that's why we were kind of ahead of most people because we knew any standard would come on. I knew who Duke Ellington. I knew who Bix Bitterview. I mean, I knew Stan Kitten Orchestra. I knew that stuff, and it wasn't because the record label and we had seen all the records from the record label being at Fantasy. One of the things we would do when we'd hang out because we were little kids running around in a record company, and it was boring to be upstairs in the offices, so we'd go down and help. There was this guy named Edwin Wong, and the other guy that worked in the. I know he hates this when people say this. But the other guy that worked in the warehouse packing records was John Fogerty early on.
The Gollywogs when was it Creedence at that point, or was he?
It was the Gollywogs.
And he was in the mailroom.
He was packing. People would buy records. He'd pack them up to ship them out. And I think the Gollywogs they were in the transition of doing over. And I remember when Susie Q came out. That was 64,
64, yeah.
64, and I remember that's when they started to get traction.
I was going to say because I had an opportunity to see Roy McCurdy and in L.A. about a month or two ago, but you were privy to those live. I just want you to talk a little.
So and then I think a summer. So I was real into. My father let us do whatever we wanted to do. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to do this. We wanted to play music. And then I got into graphic arts and printing.
He wasn't like you have to be go do something.
No, he said whatever you do, just be the best.
I dig.
Doing it.
I dig.
Whatever it is. And I worked in graphic arts and all that stuff in the early 70s. And I had a summer job at Fantasy Record working in the art department. So, and I would do, and that's big. That was when linotype, when you had to do that, line it up and scribe it out and do all that. And I would do promo shots for people, and then some of the work on some of the back album covers where you'd have to like really put it, you have to make the type. It wasn't preset.
I love this.
And during my lunch, I would just go into the studio because we were kids there and we were around since the building opened. So I would just go wander in and out of the studios. And Cannonball and Nat were doing, I forget what record, but Roy McCarty was playing.
Well, no, it was
Roy McCarty, Walter Booker,
and Hal Galper was
Hal
on.
Galper
It was on piano. There's a snaking in the grass.
was playing. I think it was maybe
Inside Straight. It was called.
Yeah. And I remember doing the lineup, the type for that for that record.
Were you taking photos too, or
No photos. We had a photographer there, but I was just doing, I do whatever work they put on my desk. And my summer project was to do the back of the Merl sound of my father's record. So the back collage, I did that as a 12-year-old. And there was, and the cool thing, I mean, now it was like kind of intimidating as a kid, but everything I had to do, I had to take it upstairs to be approved, which is I had a little stamp that you had to have 3 signatures on it before it was approved. Everyone had to see it. One was Ralph Gleason, the other was Ralph Caffel, and Saul had to sign off on all my work.
Fogerty wrote a tune called "Zants Can't Dance."
That's John, yeah.
John did that back then, but the coolest thing about Fantasy was the idea that they would bring, like Joe Williams would do an album, but they would actually bring in a live audience to cut the record there. I mean, that was
they had a Studio A was a large studio, and they would bring them a live audience for some records and do it. I remember that one, and there was another one. Hampton Halls did one with Carol Kay and Spider.
She had the big boots on.
Yeah, that was the one.
Spider Man. He'll be tuning into this.
And the funny thing was, I've known Carol a lot. I've known her since I was a kid, basically. And we were talking one
How
day,
did you know her as a kid?
Because I always knew who the good players were. My father.
But she was like an LA cat,
But she was up in San Francisco doing the Hampton Halls record.
Right.
They
did.
They did it live there.
Right.
So I knew who she was and basically as a kid, as a young teenager, I would buy records based on who was on it. That was like the first thing.
Absolutely.
I was like, okay, if this guy or this guy,
that's right.
It has to be good. And Jack DeJohnette, sure, whoever.
Dave Holland, yeah.
Dave Holland, that was the way I bought records. And there was another guy I hung out in school named Bill Langton, who was kind of like avant-garde, and he was the guy, we were into ECM and all that stuff. There was a while.
I love this.
If you couldn't find the one, that was what we'd listen to. And I'd listen to the flip here, something Rampart, Touche or something.
Jean, yeah.
And then, the guys from Colin Walcott and all that. So I would listen.
Oregon, yeah.
I would listen to those because of my friend Bill. And this is probably one of the very first shows I went to by myself that we went. Bill says, hey, man, we're going to go hear this band in Berkeley. And I was like, cool. And it was like, I drove my car over there, my buddy, and I forget it's $350, $450. We went to Berkeley Community Theater. I think I was a junior in high school. And we saw Romantic Warrior, the Romantic Warrior tour.
Oh, Lenny. Stanley.
That blew me away. They did the Romantic Warrior. They did the album from front to back. And then I remembered, then it all started to click. Okay, Lenny was the drummer that was over at Different Fur at Pat Gleason's studio.
Patrick Gleason tuning in. I love this stuff.
There was the connection to that, and Chick Corea I had known from Miles Davis stuff and whatever, and some of it still, and because of my uncle Eddie Moore, the jazz drummer, who introduced me, that's how I knew who Keith Jarrett, I knew Ornette Coleman.
Dewey Redman,
the Art Ensemble of Chicago, because that was Stanley Turrentine, Sonny Rollins. That was the world that my uncle played in.
I love this. This is beyond.
So as a kid, we were immersed with all these things. And the other thing, I would go back to school and tell my friends who were players at the time, like, dude, my father and his friends, they're badass. You guys are like, we're great friends, but you're no musicians based on what we know and what we hear on a daily basis.
And also, just for the audience, two soundtracks, Fritz the Cat and Heavy
He did another one.
Heavy Traffic,
where the organ trio. There was an Ozzie Davis movie called Black Girl.
Oh, my favorite.
that
Ray Shanklin again was on.
Yeah, Ray did the arranging, and that was and that was the stuff we were brought up and we would listen to all the time.
There's this sort of, I don't want to say it's mythology because it's sort of been documented, but I was wondering where you were at when Garcia came out of his coma. A lot of people give your dad credit for running through scales and getting him his chops back up.
So what year was that?
86.
Okay, 86. So probably in 1980, I
Yeah.
stopped working for my father full time, and I was going out on the road with other people.
Who are you going out with?
So I don't know if 86, if I was with Crosby. I worked with David Crosby in a solo band. I worked with the Hawkins family.
Oh, I love that.
I toured with Robert Cray. Frank Zappa. That was
So, but that was because
that was the late 80s.
Because Jerry almost died in '86, and then the story is that Merl would run through really
He would go over to at first the hospital and the rehab center, and they would just sit there and go and run through songs. He'd give Garcia, Paris would give Garcia a guitar, and at that point, I think he was still, the synapses weren't connecting at that point. And my father would just run through stuff with him. He would run through standards with him, and until he got to the point where he could play again.
Yeah.
I mean, and there was the disconnect, and it was probably 3 or 4 months of doing it, of probably at least I would say 3 to 4 times a week he was there, and they'd be 4 or 5 hour sessions, or as long as he could do it. And they, when he couldn't play anymore, they'd get up and take a walk, kind of deal. And that was. But that was they had some kind of weird kinship, friendship that even though they stopped playing together in a band regularly, he was always in the radar.
Yeah, and it seemed like Jerry kept coming back to him periodically to grow more. I mean, obviously, just the idea of reconstruction, you listen to Jerry, he's not a jazz guitar player.
No.
So it was hard for him.
Challenging, yes.
It was hard. Some of those tunes, especially when you listen to Ron Stallings or Ed Neumeister just blowing, and they're just taking it way out. But yet Jerry was like, "Yeah, and this is getting me off." At least he was like, it was a challenge for him.
Well, there was the thing. It was different than anything he played, and it was a space that, and that's the whole thing about a consummate musician, and the people you play with. It's like, if you're gonna get in the ring and start boxing, just do it. That's the only way you're gonna learn is jump in. You got to jump in, and with Gaylord playing drums and all that. It was all great people, and it was kind of like John gets kind of hang with it because he as a bass player was. But yeah, it was one of those. The more you do, the more you learn. The more you step into blind fields as a musician, the broader your perspective is, especially for what you do. What's your main thing?
Looking back on it now, you talk about your role here at the Fenix and not so much what you're trying to accomplish, but ultimately how you look at music. Couldn't think of asking anybody better who's been exposed to, Calvin Keyes and Michael Howe owe your father for letting them get their sea legs. But yet your dad was involved with Will Chamberlain, and he was involved with Johnny Mathis, and he played on Statler Brothers records, and did he play with the Righteous Brothers too, or?
I did in Vegas. He probably did stuff.
So the guy
he played in Vegas in the early '60s.
That's right.
In a review.
So what is that? How does that philosophy carry over to what you're doing here?
Well, one of the things that most people, I'm never like my father kind of deal, and then it's like I give people opportunity. It's kind of that. It's my philanthropic side sort of fell in, even though it's something that was nailed into us as an early age. It wasn't until my 30s that it really started to click in. And one of my the very first time I produced a show, I was working with Gibson. I produced it from start to finish, and I did a 100th anniversary show at the Fillmore. It's my friend, and I just called I called Yorma and Jack. They played the guy Paul Barrere and Fred.
My favorite cat, Little Feat, yeah.
I think Harvey Mandel. I had Joe Louis Walker.
Freddie Roulette.
No, not
Love
Freddie.
Freddie.
Greg Allman came and played. And I just basically put together a collection of people. It was a 5-hour show celebrating Gibson's 100th anniversary, and it was I called Country Joe and Barry and the bass player, which is one of the few times Country Joe and the Fish actually played together. They actually played it.
Barthol was on bass? Or?
Yeah, the three of them came and did an acoustic set in '94.
Wow.
And this was that's when my philanthropic, and the main thing about that was, and I did it as a charity for Goliath Memorial, and I remember taking the check to, Cecil Williams the next day. He just
Reverend Cecil. When did you meet him?
As a kid, I knew him from
John Turk, man, has been on the. I mean, rest in peace.
I knew Cecil since I was a kid. I walked in his office and handed him the check. I'm not going to say it, but it was a substantial amount. He just kind of looked at me. He says, you little shit. I never thought that this would, And I gave him it. I said, here, this is for you guys. And it kind of.
Dude, Turk was talking about him going. Cecil Williams would go into these ghettos and be like, up with hope, down with dope. He was the fearless cat, man.
Cecil was one of those guys that's on the street. I mean, he took over. He was. I assume he started in the early '60s. It's like, not to digress and go. It's like, hey, the Black Panthers doing the free breakfast program where they fed a lot of people, and I'm sure Cecil was involved in that back in the early '60s, and he just continued and then had his own thing in the city. That was Cecil's thing. For us, for music. Now what I do, I think I've seen so much, I've been around so much.
But you've also seen the significance of music change as well.
Yeah, and music is different than, the way, and my thing is still, I was still a kid. I was too young to be around Charles Sullivan, but I was around Bill Graham and Chet most of my life. So the thing is, just present good music, get good players, and like here when I present music, some things people need to hear. And people are like, why'd you book this? I go, first of all, I think one of the things, because I worked around Windham Hill, and I was a tour manager for a bunch of winter solstice tours, so I knew all those guys, and in this place I booked the Modern Mandolin Quartet once, and I'm like, these guys are fucking great. And I remember everyone's like, dude, it's 4 freaking mandolins, and I'm like,
yeah, right on.
And everybody in the place who's younger were like, dude, it's freaking mandolins. I said, dude, these are the best at what they do. And I would tell the staff, I said, here's the thing, you don't have to like it, you just have to appreciate for the fact that they did. And by the end of the night, the whole freaking kitchen staff and the bar staff were standing there watching these guys. And it's like, whether they were into it, but they got it. And that's what I think one of my roles. And, I'm a kid that did theater and music in school, so we have schools play here. They do their recitals here. So for me, and I grew up around Bill Graham, so I have no problem booking any act. For me, if it's good, it's good. It has nothing to do. Genres, there's, we live in a suburb, and it's eclectic taste. And for me, genres don't really mean anything, because music is music. And being able to turn people on to music, at the end of the night, when people walk out of here and they're like, wow, I never thought I'd like this. Or we're one of these things, we do a lot of dance bands, and like last night, this guy came up to me, he said, man, look at these people. And he's like,
what's your philosophy?
Multicultural. Yeah. Here's the other thing. This is a white suburb here. This is what it is. It's what it is. And to see people from different cultures freaking dancing and having fun, and they come in here and they remove all the other shit that they walked in with, and they come, and this is like, and I told the guy, I said, dude, this is the music we grew up with. When we were teenagers, we didn't have these same freaking things. If we liked the music, we were like, and we danced with our friends. So it was, people come here and they dance with people they don't know. And I've seen some of the weirdest shit happen. A quick story is there was an Asian couple they were here, and it was a nice black couple from the East Bay, and they were hip, and they were dancing. and the woman, the black couple asked them to dance, and the husband was like, no, and the wife was like, no, I'll dance with you. And she got up and danced, and finally, and this has been going on the whole night, and the dude's like a surgeon or some shit like that. It's an Asian guy. He's like, oh. And she says, when's the last time you danced with your wife? And he's like, when we got married, like 20-something years ago. And by the end of the night, the black chick had got this Asian dude. He says, you're going to dance with me. You are. And got the dude to get up and dance. And the dude had like the biggest freaking smile on his face. And I went over to say goodnight to them, and he says, this is the first time I've danced with my wife in 25 years. And so this is the kind of environment we want here. It's just like, this is it. Music is people have lost the fact that music heals or does whatever. However people want to look at this, it's spiritually. It's however it hits them. But this is it's like one of those safe environments to let it happen. And I do jazz one night, I'll do rock one night, I'll do country the next night.
You're not, and also, you're not bringing in cover bands.
I do cover bands. Hey, this is business, you know.
I dig.
People like tribute shit. I don't know why, but they do.
They didn't like it when you're dead. There's
No.
no. I mean, that's the point. Is that to me, there's this conundrum where, like, I mean, Lenny White was saying it too to me, where it's like, you know, you got to be doing the music of Benny Golson or the music of Herbie Hancock. You know, that is ridiculous. I mean,
No, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, last night was an Isley Brothers tribute band, and they nailed it. I mean, they did Isley Brothers stuff, and it's like, and with the multi-ethnic crowd, you know, people were like, the guy was like, we're going to do their very first hit, and people. Here's the thing: people have heard this song over and over again. People never knew that Twist and Shout was an Isley Brothers song. And all of a sudden they're like, ah.
well, that's education.
Yeah, it's education.
Jimi Hendrix is hard to do. That's a hard tribute to do.
Well, it's that. But here, people nowadays, I don't know. I was thinking about this earlier. It's like when I was a kid, you listened to it on the radio, you saw it on TV, and if you wanted to hear it again, you either had to sit on your radio station and wait for the song to come on, or you went to the record store and bought it. The sad thing is, I remember, because I was thinking about this, freaking 45s were 99 cents when I was a kid, and they're still freaking 99 cents for a single track, which is kind of weird. I mean,
Not the Merl Saunders big band.
yeah, I mean, but it's kind
No,
of
I'm
weird.
with you. I'm with you.
And
Yeah.
albums were whatever $7 when I was a kid. Now they're whatever 19 or I don't know albums. But I mean, there's a thing about that. So people come in and people want to hear what they want to hear. People want to hear what they're familiar with. One of the downsides of whatever when the internet whatever destroyed the business was now there's so much stuff that people don't know what to listen to.
Well, yeah.
And so much of it is I mean, it's great that people do what they want to do, but so much of it is just not good. I mean, you know, when Abbott came out, when you were able to do shit yourself, instead of make enough money to really go in and do it. I mean, before it was like musicians were only ones that were hardcore enough to make enough money to go into a studio, because that was the only way you were going to get your stuff pressed and released anyway. And nowadays anyone can do it, so it's cluttered the market. So now people, the audience, whatever, the baby boomers, they want to hear what they want to hear. They want to hear what's familiar with us. I'm of a certain age that I was too old for hip hop. I don't get it. It's not my deal. My kids love it. I have no idea.
A lot of cats would say that's the real folk music of our time, but you know.
I mean, there's that. You know, I listen to real music. I mean, that's it. And I think it's great when bands. There's a girl that played here a couple weeks ago, Noelle Hampton. It was so nice to see a full house with someone playing original music. That's it. There's the guitar player, Jose Neto, that plays in Steve Winwood's band. That he lives here half the time. He comes in, it's Brazilian jazz. The guy packs the place. But the cool thing about it, it's all original songs. And people are digging it. And there's very few bands that can do that. Or local bands that really play. You know, for this kind of, I don't do punk, I don't do hip hop here. That's kind of like it. But, you know, some of the rock guys play their own stuff, you know, interspersed with different things. But some music nowadays is, people gravitate. I mean, I listen to everything back from, I listen to old Stevie Wonder. I listen to anything. I mean, I still listen to Chick Corea. I still listen to, you know, the jazz stuff. I'm a runner. I mean, I have freaking Giant Steps from Culture. That's on my running playlist.
Naima.
Yeah, there's stuff like that. I mean, but it was because, and for me, that's like comfort food. So when I listen to Ahmad Jamal or I listen to Nancy Wilson, that takes me back to like that's the soul of where I started. So when I listen to some of those songs, it takes me back to when I was a kid. It's, you know, early Stevie Wonder, like the Supreme stuff, early Marvin Gaye stuff. That's sort of my comfort food, and you know it's what it is. And the sort of early '70s, you know, I might pull out, you know, Hall & Oates because they're early. Abandoned Luncheonette record, great record. You know, the early Gino Vanelli stuff. It's just like that's and to me I was brought up on diverse music, so it was like I listened to everything. You know, most people ask me the first record I bought, and I think it was because of my brother and his friends. My first record I bought, first two records. One was Bill Withers live at Carnegie Hall. The other one was the Chicago
James
box.
Gadsden on drums.
Yeah, and the second one was the 4-record box set of Chicago Live at Carnegie Hall. Those are the first 2 records I ever bought. I spent my own money on. I had tons of records before, but they were all given to us by record companies.
Before I let you go, your dad played at a movie theater with Lionel Hampton. Can you take us through that?
From the story I hear, it was they had won the jazz comp, they had won the Bay
The
Area.
Johnny Mathis band?
Well, it was my father's band.
I'm sorry,
and Johnny was just the singer.
The Gentleman, what was it called?
The Educated Gentleman, and they had won the Battle of the Bands, and the thing was they got to play with Lionel Hampton at the Golden Gate Theater, and that was like one of the things. It was one of the things for being one of the better bands, and they played with Hampton, and then eventually he played with them eventually, but yeah,
He went on the road with him,
yeah,
right?
he went on the road,
Right, but this
a
was
very short stint.
This was, yeah, he didn't like it, but the movie, the curtain would go up and then the band would come out during.
Yeah, that was in the 50s. Between they would show comic shorts and a big band would play, and at the time that was the only thing there. But big bands would play during the day during things. So, Ellington band, Stan Kenton band. People saw that shit, and it was just like, it was an amazing time. That was it. But that was what it was the sign. It was the times. Because back then you either listened to 78s, I think that was before 33s, or 33s were just coming to the scene. So, and like my father, they listened to radio. I mean, TV wasn't a big thing for them.
Dear friend of mine and yours is Bill Vitt, and when I listened back to the Keystone encores, he's playing. I mean, there was a period of time where he was playing with Yogi Flem, which was Sons of Champlin when they renamed it, and then also he was playing with your dad and Jerry. But what did your dad get off about Vitt's playing? Because he was just the nasty, and he was actually a total piano player.
And I think that the thing that my father liked was Bill was a jazz drummer.
Serious.
Playing rock, but he could play rock, so he could add he could lay the foundation, the kind of groove that my father wanted to play on top, versus a straight 4/4 thing, which is it's what it was. But that was, I think, the difference between where Kurtzman was more of like a rock, was more
elastic rock or something.
I mean, no, because Kurtzman was into like the meters. I remember he's the one that turned us on to the meters, so he was into that. So
and it makes sense because they keep pulling George Porter on stage with Dead and Company now, so he loves Zig.
Yeah, no, I remember Kurtzman coming to our house with the Meters Rejuvenation record.
He was freaking out.
He came out. You gotta listen to this.
Oh, I love it. Dude.
And that was and Bill was a more free player, so he could play the Freedom Jazz stuff, the Freedom Jazz dance and all that stuff, how it should have been played, instead of a rock guy trying to figure out how to play swing.
It was genius because if you listen to the Merl's tune, they take it out and he's playing. He actually holds it together with your dad because Jerry and John were doing their thing, but it enhanced the whole thing. And I mean, Bill Vitt really. I mean, he was doing Don Costa records back in the 50s.
And then they were also Fogerty's original rhythm section on Tom's first records. So that was and it was free enough where Tom could be,
Still trying to get my head around those records.
He wasn't Doug Clifford. I mean, Bill didn't play like Doug Clifford, which is what John was used to playing with, since they were all teenagers. But it allowed him the freedom to do what he wanted to do.
Merl Saunders Jr., such an honor to be with you, man, and we'll do it again sometime soon. You got a treasure trove of stories, and appreciate your honesty and your love of the music, man.
Thank you. It's all good.
It's the Jake Feinberg Show. See you later.